The fate of a congressional infrastructure deal hangs in the balance after a failed procedural vote last week. But countless hours spent by senators on both sides of the aisle are giving some a reason for cautious optimism.
We're about 90% of the way there. I'm here this weekend working on legislative language with colleagues and with staff, and I feel good about getting that done this week. We have one issue outstanding, and we're not getting much response from the Democrats on it. It's about mass transit. Our transit number is very generous. We increased transit in this proposal. We also increased the formula going forward. That's the one issue that's outstanding, frankly, at this point. My hope is that we'll see progress on that yet today.
I think we've got a menu of options, and candidly, we've had those menus of spending items agreed to for weeks. What we have had to work through, because my Republican colleagues did not want to use enhanced or actually making sure we follow our IRS tax laws. So we've had to replace some of those pay-fors. We're down to the last couple of items, and I think you're going to see a bill Monday afternoon.
Despite the hopes, there is still no bill for the press or the public to view. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is threatening to hold the chamber in session through the weekend if a deal isn't done by then. Meanwhile, the House Select Committee is set to hold its first hearing on the January 6th Capitol insurrection Tuesday. Over the weekend, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appointed Illinois Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger to join the investigation. He is her second Republican pick after Congresswoman Liz Cheney, a former member of House GOP leadership. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy pulled all 5 of his Republican nominees last week after Speaker Pelosi rejected Congressman Jim Jordan and Jim Banks. They are 2 staunch allies of former President Trump. Plus, COVID-19 infection rates are rising across the country. The spread is being driven by the Delta variant and unvaccinated Americans, who account for 97% of coronavirus hospitalizations. New projections show COVID cases will likely continue to rise over the next few months, peaking in mid-October. Daily deaths could more than triple from current levels, rising back up to around 850 a day. President Biden said this Monday morning when asked about the significant number of unvaccinated Americans.
Mr. President, do you have confidence you can get the unvaccinated Americans vaccinated?
We have to.
And finally, a new survey shows a nearly 20-point spike in the number of Americans who believe the country is heading in the wrong direction. The new ABC Ipsos poll shows the increase from early May, now at 55% who are pessimistic. For more, let's bring in David Drucker and Anita Kumar. David is a senior political correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and Anita is a White House correspondent and associate editor for Politico. Welcome. It's good to have you both. David, on infrastructure, we have been talking about infrastructure for weeks and weeks. How close are lawmakers in reality to a deal, and how close are they to a vote?
Right. Well, we've really been talking about infrastructure for years, and now we may finally be on the cusp of a vote. I think a lot of this is really going to come down to political will. Do Republicans and Democrats together have the will to get a deal done? Is the White House going to put pressure on Democrats in the Senate if they're hesitant to give Republicans some of the things that they say they must have in order to bring along enough support to overcome a filibuster? Are Republicans going to continue to work with Democrats, understanding some of the political pressures they have so that they also can say that they got a win out of this? And I think really we could talk about the different pay-fors, how you're going to pay for this, what's included in this deal, what's being left out. But ultimately, Elaine, I just think it comes down to political will. Do the parties want to do a deal? And are they willing to go back to their voters and say, look, it isn't perfect. I know I had to give the other side something. You don't really like that something. But I believe that what we got in return and what everybody's going to get in return is worth it. And you're going to agree with me once you see all of this fleshed out in black and white. I think that's what's been sorely missing in Washington really for a long time. It preceded Joe Biden, really preceded Donald Trump, is the political will of the parties to do deals, to compromise when we're not in crisis, but just to produce spending bills and investments of taxpayer dollars and things that voters claim to want. It's been missing. It looks like there may be a chance here for them to do something, but I'm not going to believe it or predict it until I see it cross the finish line.
Yeah, I think a lot of folks would share that sentiment. And Anita, of course, these negotiations are not happening in a vacuum. We have this separate reconciliation bill. And as we had heard about discussions surrounding that bill, the focus was on, quote unquote, human infrastructure, things like childcare, et cetera. But can you explain now why, Anita, we are hearing about immigration reform being tied to that reconciliation bill?
Sure. I think the reason we're hearing about it is because they haven't done anything with it yet. There are a lot of Democrats that have, were hopeful that on day one of this new Congress and this new administration, that immigration reform would be front and center. You know, it's one of the top things that the president talked about on the campaign trail. He talked about how he was going to have a different kind of immigration system than President Trump had. And so he came into office and he did talk about it at the beginning, but there hasn't been any movement on Capitol Hill to get a grand, compromise on immigration. And so what you see is Democrats looking to try to put at least some pieces of immigration in this reconciliation bill. Now, there's a big if here. We don't know if the Senate parliamentarian is going to allow it. There are some signals that it might happen, or it could happen, or it might be allowed, but we just don't know for sure. So what you're seeing is the talk of not all the different pieces of immigration reform, but really just a pathway to citizenship or legalization for some of these populations that we hear about all the time. So we're talking about dreamers, those immigrants who came here when they were young, those that are already in the country with a protected status because they have, their disasters happening in their homeland, like earthquakes, things like that. And then those essential workers, people that worked, immigrants that worked in the country during the coronavirus pandemic. So farm workers or other, those that worked in healthcare, other important fields. So they're talking about trying to put that in there simply because there's not another mechanism to get to immigration. This is one of those things that they are just trying to find a spot for. And so that's why you're hearing about this. President Biden has said he is supportive of the idea, or the White House has said it. But again, we just don't know if it's going to be allowed to be in there.
All right, we'll continue to watch that. Let's turn to the January 6th committee. David, by pulling all of his Republican nominees off House Democrats committee, Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy has effectively relinquished any potential influence he might have had over that investigation. How does each party see the committee's work factoring into the midterms?
Well, I don't know yet that they're really putting it through a midterm prism yet. It's just that we're so far out, except this issue has become politically charged for each party's base voters. And, I think what Kevin McCarthy is trying to balance, and he's got more to balance than Nancy Pelosi. For the speaker, it's as simple as she wants a committee. She's not worried about what it's going to uncover, and she's not facing any pressure from Joe Biden, the president, over how she handles it or whether she handles it at all. Kevin McCarthy is trying to, on the one hand, keep former President Donald Trump off of his back, because if former President Trump is critical of how he handles the commission, it could hurt him with grassroots fundraising and with voter turnout. And then he also just has to deal with the voters in his party who are split. There are some that don't want any participation in the January 6th committee, and they think it's a sham. But there are enough Republicans or voters that tend to vote Republican that McCarthy would like to have votes from in the midterm elections that do think January 6th was an actual major horrible event. They do want to know more about it, and they do think it should be investigated. And so I think Kevin McCarthy's trying to balance all of this. I do think, though, that when the speaker decided to rule out not just Jim Jordan, but also Congressman Jim Banks from Indiana, he was put in the position of rubber stamping that by accepting that and replacing both of them. He probably would have done the same if it had just been Jim Jordan, but you could at least make the case that Jim Jordan is a partisan provocateur He's always sided with President Trump on everything, and he's always sort of in the middle of these cultural fights. Jim Banks is the chairman of the Republican Study Committee. They put out a ton of legislation. He's conservative. You may not like it, but he's actually tried to talk about how the party deals with the different aspects of Trump. And I think that excommunicating both of them from the committee left Kevin McCarthy with really no other choice, because he's leading the Republican conference and he's trying to juggle a Republican former president who continues to tell the Republican base that the election was stolen. We know there's nothing to this, but a lot of them believe him. And that's just part of McCarthy's job description these days.
You know, David, it's really interesting to hear you spell out this really complicated political landscape for Kevin McCarthy. But the thing I'm wondering about is, with the choice of Jim Jordan, as you described him, was that not to some extent predictable that House Speaker Nancy Pelosi would object to the selection of him for this particular committee?
Yeah, it is. And you could make an argument that Kevin McCarthy did not want any Republican participation in the committee. Ultimately, Kevin McCarthy had given John Katko, he sort of deputized him to negotiate a deal for a legislated bipartisan committee. Katko was able to reach a deal, and then McCarthy said no thanks. And some Republicans say, well, the Senate, in the Senate, it was never going to happen because Republicans weren't going to give it 60 votes, so it's really not Kevin McCarthy's fault. But you could make this. You could sort of posit that Kevin McCarthy found a way to get out of this without it being him that said no. But I also think that the speaker made it easier for him to defend when it wasn't just Jordan that she rejected. Ultimately, I think voters are going to have the final say here. And if this is a big deal, then Kevin McCarthy will have made a mistake. I would still argue, as much as I can make a case for why we need a January 6th committee and why it's a mistake to be deemed at fault for trying to inhibit this, that voters are going to go to the polls in 22 and most likely be concerned most about kitchen table issues and fixated on whether or not they approve of the president and his party that controls all of Washington.
Yeah, that's what we've continued to see in polls after elections. Certainly, those kitchen table issues are what are foremost in people's minds. And on that note, Anita, let's discuss the economic impact of the Delta variant. So COVID cases are rising just as pandemic-related benefits are about to expire. Here's White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki on that earlier today.
The way the American Rescue Plan was designed was for it to have lasting effects that would go over the series of several months, far beyond the initial months of implementation. So there are components of the American Rescue Plan that are still being implemented that will still be implemented for months to come. That's a lesson we've learned from the past about how people will need assistance for a longer period of time than just a short window. When it comes to the economy, there's no significant signs, according to our economists at this point, that the Delta variant impact across the country. We'd expect that much of any economic impact would be felt in the communities with lower vaccination rates.
What problem does this pose for the Biden administration as they push for these big spending proposals?
Yeah, I think that you saw right there what Jen Psaki, what the White House is really, what their message is, which is there's going to be these long-lasting impacts of what they've already done. So as Jen Psaki just said there, that they hope to see the economic benefits for months and years to come, really. But what we are finding out is that we are hearing from, my colleagues talk to economists, and I know other outlets have done the same, is that there is some worry that with all of these benefits that we have been talking about expiring soon, that there may be a shift here, that there may be an impact. And that has caused some concern for the White House, outside the White House as well, both economic concerns and I would say political concerns. So there are Democrats as well worried about what this looks like. And they're worried both about the economy, but they're also worried about the high rises of, infection rates. So that's something that the White House is going to be looking at. And they say now that one thing that they want to do is go ahead and pass these bills, talk about these spending bills. And this is another reason that they're using to put them out there and say that they need to be passed, that they can have further long-term impact. And that's, I suspect that what we're going to see President Biden say this week as he travels to Pennsylvania, and we're going to see other White House officials say, is that this is an even more important time for this infrastructure bill to pass and this reconciliation bill as well. And so that's going to be their message going forward.
All right, a busy week ahead. David Drucker and Anita Kumar, good to have you both. Thank you very much. For more on this from Capitol Hill, I want to bring in CBS News congressional correspondent Kris Van Cleave. Hi there, Kris. So even if this bipartisan infrastructure bill makes it through the Senate, there are warning signs about it passing in the House. What is Speaker Pelosi saying?
Well, Speaker Pelosi has maintained and reiterated this over the weekend that she's not going to pass the infrastructure bill without the larger reconciliation bill. And, that upsets Republicans because they say that goes against the spirit of what President Biden has said he wanted here, which was a bipartisan infrastructure that could pass on its own. I don't think it's a secret that Democrats plan to go a two-track process here. The speaker is simply saying she's not going to pass infrastructure until there's also a reconciliation bill to pass. And right now that's a $3.5 trillion or so bill. Of course, the bigger hurdle may be getting through the roadblock of getting to an agreement so that the Senate can even vote on something. But if the Senate is able to pass infrastructure, it's going to go to the House and likely wait until there is a reconciliation bill to go along with it.
On the January 6th committee, Congressman Jim Jordan was one of the Republican appointees Speaker Pelosi objected to after Kevin McCarthy chose him to join that committee. You spoke with Congressman Jordan earlier. What is he saying?
Well, the congressman is never one that's short for words, but he reiterated a lot of what we heard last week, that he and the Republicans the 5 Republicans that would have been on this panel had Kevin McCarthy not pulled them all off, will continue to look at January 6th. Their question is, why wasn't there a bigger security presence here? Why was the Capitol unprepared? They of course want to steer that towards Speaker Nancy Pelosi as it being her fault. I asked him about the talk about the mounting calls inside the GOP conference to punish Kinzinger and Cheney for being on the panel. He said he's not a big believer in that. He would rather leave it up to the voters. He suspects the voters will punish the two of them by voting them out. I did ask him also if he would be watching tomorrow. He said he absolutely plans to watch the hearing, and I think you'll hear more from those 5 Republicans about whatever path they plan to go forward. We've heard from Minority Leader McCarthy that he wanted to do his own investigation. It is likely that Banks and Jordan will be at the center of whatever that effort looks like.
All right, Kris Van Cleave on Capitol Hill. Kris, we know it's a busy week for you. We appreciate your reporting and insight. Thanks so much.
Sure thing.